This video is a brief review of issues facing our nation. They are very serious. This is intended for American men who possess intellect, emotional stability, and critical thinking skills. It is an outreach and a call for a peaceful but unflinching examination of symptoms. So long as our military and our law enforcement officers are squarely on the side of the ordinary American, then all our children will live in dignity as a free people, and the legacy of this great nation can be preserved and healed. We've entrusted our officers with our safety. Their faithfulness will be key to our future. Consider the following: a constant state of war.
What happened in 9/11 is we didn't have a strategy, we didn't have bipartisan agreement, we didn't have American understanding of it, and we had instead a policy coup in this country. A coup. A policy coup. Some hard-nosed people took over the direction of American policy, and they never bothered to inform the rest of us. I went downstairs, I was leaving the Pentagon, and an officer from the Joint Staff called me into his office and said, I want you to know, he said, "Sir, we're going to attack Iraq." And I said, "Why?" He said, "We don't know." He said, I said, "Well, did they tie Saddam to 9/11? He said, "No." And then I came back to the Pentagon about 6 weeks later. I saw the same officer. I said, why haven't we attacked Iraq? We still going to attack Iraq? He said, "Oh, sir," he says, "it's worse than that." He said, he pulled up a piece of paper off his desk. He said, "I just got this memo from the Secretary of Defense's office. It says we're going to attack and destroy the governments in 7 countries in 5 years. We're going to start with Iraq, and then we're going to move to Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran." I sat on this information for a long time, for about 6 or 8 months. I was so stunned by this I couldn't begin to talk about it. And I couldn't believe it would really be true, but that's actually what happened. These people took control of the policy in the United States. The purpose of the military is to start wars and change governments. It's not to sort of deter conflict. We're going to invade countries, and you know, my mind was spinning. And I put that aside. It was like a nugget that you hold on to. This country was taken over by a group of people with a policy coup. Wolfowitz and Cheney and Rumsfeld, and you could name a half dozen other collaborators from the Project for a New American Century. They wanted us to destabilize the Middle East, turn it upside down, make it under our control. It went back to those comments in 1991. Now, did anybody ever tell you that? Was there a national dialogue on this? Did senators and congressmen stand up and denounce this plan? Was there a full-fledged American debate on it? Absolutely not. And there still isn't.
The breeding of terrorism.
In 2000, the year 2000, there were 20 suicide attacks around the world. One was anti-American. Last year, in the last 12 months, there have been over 300 suicide attacks around the world, over 270 anti-American inspired. By the core metric that matters, we are producing more terrorists than we're killing. The war on terror has simply been an abysmal failure. But why? If you go to our CPOST website, we've put a phenomenal amount of data on the web for free for you to search and for you to export. And this may be especially helpful for journalists, folks in government, people doing research to generate reports on suicide terrorism. What over 95% of all suicide attacks since 1980 have had in common is not religion, but a specific strategic objective to compel a democratic state to withdraw combat forces. I don't mean advisors with sidearms. I mean tanks, fighter aircraft, and armor units from territory the terrorists consider their homeland or prize greatly. Occupations can also create the environment in which people can become heroes for their community by throwing off the occupation. Occupations can also encourage people to become religious, even more religious, perhaps as a way to deal with this newfound environment suddenly oppressing them. There have been over 1,800 suicide attacks around the world, many times more than from 1980 to 2003. And notice where they are. They're not scattered around the world as they would be if they were merely the product of religious fanaticism or any ideology independent of a circumstance. They're concentrated. They're concentrated tightly around occupations. And what we've been doing by putting in the ground forces is we've been actually giving bin Laden his best meal ticket, because that's the thing that recruits for him better than anything else. There may be teeny tiny other issues that he could use as wedge issues, much smaller, but man, when we give him his best mobilization appeal to recruit, we're just open the doors.
Our missing money.
And in the rush to fund the war on terrorism, the war on waste seems to have been forgotten.
My 03 budget calls for more than $48 billion in new defense spending.
More money for the Pentagon when its own auditors admit the military cannot account for 25% of what it already spends.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
$2.3 trillion with a T. That's $8,000 for every man, woman, and child in America. To understand how the Pentagon can lose track of trillions, consider the case of one military accountant who tried to find out what happened to a mere $300 million.
We know it's gone, but we don't know what they spent it on.
Jim Minery, a former Marine turned whistleblower, is risking his job by speaking out for the first time about the millions he noticed were missing from one defense agency's balance sheets. Minery tried to follow the money trail, even crisscrossing the country looking for records.
The director looked at me and he says, "Why do you care about this stuff?" It took me aback, you know. My supervisor asked me why I care about doing a good job. So.
He was reassigned and says officials then covered up the problem by just writing it off.
They got to cover it up. That's where the corruption comes in. They've got to cover up the fact that they can't do the job.
20 years ago, Pentagon employee Franklin C. Spinney made headlines exposing what he calls the accounting games. He's still there, and although he does not speak for the Pentagon, he believes the problem has gotten worse.
Those numbers are pie in the sky. The books are cooked routinely year after year after year.
Retired Vice Admiral Jack Shanahan commanded the Navy's Second Fleet the first time Donald Rumsfeld served as Defense Secretary.
With good financial oversight, we could find $48 billion in loose change in that building without having to hit the taxpayers.
It's surprising to me that it's gotten essentially no mainstream media coverage at all, because we're talking about so much money.
The Federal Reserve is the black hole in American democracy.
All we have to say is, what do they have to hide?
The Federal Reserve had a responsibility to provide oversight for the conduct of banks. They didn't do that.
My concern about the legislation is that if the GAO is auditing not only the operational aspects of our programs and the details of the programs, but is making judgments about our policy decisions, that would effectively be a takeover of monetary policy by the Congress, a repudiation of the independence of the Federal Reserve, which would be highly destructive to the stability of the financial system, the dollar, and our national economic situation.
The Fed has doled out more than $1 trillion to financial institutions without consulting Congress. When freshman Congressman Alan Grayson asked the Fed's Inspector General how much of that money the Federal Reserve had lost since the crisis began, he was surprised to find out she didn't know.
So are you telling me that nobody at the Federal Reserve is keeping track on a regular basis of the losses that it incurs on what is now a $2 trillion portfolio?
Until we actually look at the program and have the information, we are not in a position to say whether there are losses or to respond in any other way.
And I think it was shocking to me and to other people to see that the Inspector General could not account for $1 trillion of cash that had been handed out by the Federal Reserve in the course of just the past few months.
Time, the gentlewoman from Ohio.
Consent to address the House for 1 minute, Mr. Speaker.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, my message to the American people: don't let Congress seal this Wall Street deal. High financial crimes have been committed. Now Congress is being asked to bail out the culprits, and to do so at the expense of those who elected us to guard their interests, the people of our country. The normal legislative process that should accompany review of a monumental proposal to bail out Wall Street has been shelved. Yes, shelved. Only a few insiders are doing the dealing. Sounds like insider trading to me. These criminals have so much political power they can shut down the normal legislative process of the highest lawmaking body in this land. All the committees that should be scanning every word of what is being negotiated are benched, and that means the American people are benched too. We are constitutionally sworn to protect and defend this republic against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And my friends, there are enemies. We are told we will have a bill, $1 trillion bill to review soon, and have less than 24 hours with no regular hearings to try to vote on this tar baby. The people pushing this deal are the very same ones who were responsible for the implosion on Wall Street. They were fraudulent then, and they're fraudulent now. We should say no to this deal. I ask my colleagues to join us at 2 o'clock in HC8 of the Capitol to meet with some real experts who've done financial resolutions without putting the burden on the taxpayer. Please join us, HC8 at 2 p.m.
The only way they can pass this bill is by creating and sustaining a panic atmosphere. That atmosphere is not justified. Many of us were told in private conversations that if we voted against this bill on Monday, that the sky would fall, the market would drop 2,000 or 3,000 points the first day, another couple thousand the second day, and a few members were even told that there would be martial law in America if we voted no. That's what I call fear-mongering.
I was taken with your candor at the conference here in New York to hear you say that this crisis we're going through, this economic and financial meltdown, is driven by fraud. What's your definition of fraud?
Fraud is deceit. And the essence of fraud is I create trust in you, and then I betray that trust and get you to give me something of value. And as a result, there's no more effective acid against trust than fraud, especially fraud by top elites. And that's what we have. We know that will produce enormous fraud. This stuff, the exotic stuff that you're talking about, was created out of things like liar's loans that were known to be extraordinarily bad. And now it was getting AAA ratings. Now, a AAA rating is supposed to mean there is zero credit risk. So you take something that not only has significant, it has crushing risk. That's why it's toxic. And you create this fiction that it has zero risk. That itself, of course, is a fraudulent exercise. After 9/11, the attacks, the Justice Department transfers 500 white-collar specialists in the FBI to national terrorism. And we can all understand that, but then the Bush administration refused to replace the missing 500 agents.
A Florida woman had her own fight with a bank, and this week we learned that Lynn Simoniak will be paid $18 million for uncovering a massive foreclosure fraud. On Monday, 4 top banks agreed to pay $95 million to settle charges that they used fraudulent paperwork in thousands of foreclosures. Simoniak discovered the scheme while fighting her own foreclosure. Simoniak went online and looked at hundreds of Florida mortgage records.
Then I began to find the strange signatures.
She found Linda Green had many signatures, and Green was a vice president at a lot of banks, all at the same time. Green had signed thousands of documents.
All within the same week.
So you're Linda Green?
Yes. Can't you tell?
Chris Pendley showed us how he and other low-wage employees signed documents as Vice President Linda Green.
In my mind, this is an absolute intentional fraud.
I don't think that there's been any accountability. So many people who were totally irresponsible walked away with so much money. And some people were taken totally to the cleaners. It was a disgrace. It was a disgrace. There were a lot of people involved.
Steve began reporting this story in real time as the House of Cards began to fall in 2007. His first story on trouble in the U.S. housing market aired months before the Wall Street collapse.
In the last 6 months, Americans have seen their investments shrink, their property values plummet, and the country edge closer towards a recession.
And going back to your mindset back in the fall of 2008, would you have thought that no one would have been held accountable for this?
No. I don't think anybody in the country thought that. Everybody believed that some people were probably going to go to jail, and that certainly hasn't happened. Yeah, I'm astounded. Astounded.
The mantra has been that a lot of unethical behavior may have taken place, irresponsible, even reckless behavior or greed on Wall Street that led to this. But that doesn't necessarily mean crimes were committed or laws were broken. And that, I think, based on a lot of the reporting that we've done, I think that's a rather lazy interpretation of things.
I think this is the last story I'll do about nobody being held accountable, because I've really sort of given up. I don't think that the federal government, either the SEC or the Justice Department, are going to bring any cases against individuals. I just don't think that they're going to.
Body searches, personal dignity, and changing boundaries.
Agents now use the front of their hands rather than the back. They also run their hands up the inside of the passenger's legs. It was that intimate screening method that got Tynan riled up.
Okay, I don't understand how a sexual assault can be made a condition of my flying.
This is not considered a sexual assault.
It would be if you weren't the government.
And have you ever been so mad you just can't do anything but cry?
The tears are dried, but the memory is still there.
I thought, this is humiliating me.
She put her full hand on my breast and said, "What is this?" And I said, "It's a prosthesis because I've had breast cancer." And she goes, "Well, you'll need to show me that."
Kathy was asked to remove her prosthetic breast as a flight attendant on her way to work.
I did not take the name of the person at the time because it was just so horrific of an experience that it just blew my mind. I couldn't understand. I couldn't believe that somebody had done that to me.
It's humiliation.
71-year-old Robert Perry was also taken to a room like this by a TSA agent when his artificial knee set off the metal detector.
He yelled at me, "No, get the belt off. I told you to get the belt off." So I took the belt off. He ran his hands down over and pulled the pants down. They went down around my ankles.
At that point, Perry was standing in his underwear in public view. He asked to see a supervisor. That made things worse.
She went around my waist, she was behind me, she then proceeded to touch all of my buttocks, including reaching back from underneath towards the front of my, towards my genital area.
At the time of the incident, Erin says she froze and should have spoken up to stop it, but was so embarrassed she could not speak.
Less than 1 week, the TSA is dealing with 3 separate accusations that they strip-searched elderly passengers. All 3 began their trips in New York en route to right here in South Florida. 3 women, one similar story. Ruth Sherman says she was violated.
It felt like I was raped.
Linda Kalish of Boynton Beach was frightened.
Your biggest fear, you're going to lose your stuff, they're going to take it away.
And Lenore Zimmerman, 85 years old, was mortified.
They took down my slacks, and then they took my underwear down.
These 3 South Florida frequent flyers, each with a medical condition, accused the TSA of strip-searching them before catching their JetBlue flights. TSA says no improper strip searches took place, none of the women were improperly touched, and that officers followed all standard protocols.
I want to know what the definition of a strip search is.
What do you like? You like tigers, animals, anything like that? Huh?
Rocco, he's got to check you. He's just going to check you out, okay?
Yeah. Can you sit up for me?
Sit up. Real nice.
You're a good boy.
Rocco, they gotta just check you, okay? It's no big deal. Yeah, we're gonna go there and then we're gonna eat in a minute. I know. It's kind of weird, but it's no big deal. And then you can put your Crocs on. Natalie, go on. What do you think of this? Weird, huh? It's a little weird.
Yeah.
Are you nervous? Don't be nervous. It's okay. He's just checking to make sure that we're okay to get on the plane, that's all. Okay?
Yeah, that's all.
We're almost done, buddy. Okay? It's okay. It's okay. He's just checking you out. Checking out this chair.
Your set, sir.
Okay, thank you.
And last month at the airport in Chattanooga, Tennessee, my 3-year-old daughter, Mandy, went from this happy little girl to this during an ordeal through security. My cell phone has about 17 seconds of this. Here, a TSA employee we've decided not to show is patting down Mandy while my wife holds her.
All the joking started after TSA agent Rolando Negrin walked through a full-body imaging machine like this one, which gives a glimpse of a person practically naked. The agents who work at Miami International Airport were taking part in a training session, and reportedly, when they saw Negrin's body, they honed in on his private parts. Tuesday, he'd apparently had enough. An arrest report says the 44-year-old used his baton to beat a co-worker who'd been making jokes about the size of Negrin's private parts for the last year. The report says Negrin told police he could not take the jokes anymore and lost his mind.
Urban military training operations on American soil.
The LAPD and elite military units conducted extraordinary counterterrorism training in the skies above downtown LA tonight.
Indeed, Rick, what we saw tonight is something you normally do not see over the skies of Los Angeles. Dive, 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 dive.
Military maneuvers by Special Operation Forces in full swing over the skies of Los Angeles. Our cameras were there when a Black Hawk helicopter and 4 OH-6s, or Little Birds, flew over the city.
Maybe you heard it, maybe you saw it. I did. A lot of you on Facebook and Twitter said you did too. Lights and sounds booming through the darkness of night in parts of South Florida. The noise that is leaving many of us sleepless in the city.
A pretty scary scene along the Chicago River turns out to be a military training exercise.
Well, Bob, about 90 seconds ago, two choppers came zooming right up the Chicago River here, close enough almost for us to touch them. There was a bland press release in early afternoon from City Hall that referred to, quote, a routine military training exercise. Well, there was nothing routine that folks reported about seeing the jarring, as they witnessed the jarring scene of at least 3 Black Hawk helicopters flying at times.
It's a military mission in North St. Louis. Heavily armored vehicles are rolling into town, and while they come in peace, there are all kinds of rumors about why they are here.
St. Louis police first put out the word that people may see these armored security vehicles in their neighborhood, especially near the Army Reserve Armory in North St. Louis on Goodfellow. But that was about all the information they released. It turns out this is a group of military police in from Fort Meade, Maryland, and they are here to train members of the 354th MP Company here in St. Louis on how to drive these rigs.
Well, you couldn't see it, but you sure could hear it last night in the skies over Boston. Low-flying helicopters causing a real scare for some people. The night team's Susan Tran is in Boston tonight. Susan, what exactly was happening here?
Well, just imagine hearing the deafening sound of helicopters coming outside of your home and seeing these military helicopters with no lights on, weaving in between all of the city's skyscrapers. For folks who saw this scene, they say it was so exceptionally scary because they had no idea it was all a drill. The mayor's office says that this type of training, this military training, is necessary so that crews can be ready for an urban setting, for those who might be deployed overseas, and for the mandatory training certification that everyone needs to go through.
If you see military helicopters flying low over Minneapolis, do not be alarmed. They are training in an urban environment. The U.S. Special Operations Command will be conducting these exercises until the beginning of September. This week, they are using helicopters, including Black Hawks. They're not giving out their exact training locations because they don't want crowds to gather, but you may get a glimpse of the helicopters flying low between 7 p.m. and midnight.
Yep, that's the view outside my window. Oh, there's another one coming in.
Mass surveillance of American citizens.
It's estimated that people in this country send billions of emails each day. True, a lot of emails are junk, but others hold our innermost thoughts. They share intimacies, our complaints, or maybe our political opinions. And if you think your emails are private, prepare to watch and learn about a number of cases that each raise questions about how the government may be going through electronic mail. There is evidence the government has been intercepting most emails as part of its terrorist surveillance program. That program has been criticized as illegal because it's missing an important ingredient: search warrants. For 22 years, Klein worked as a technician for the largest telecommunications company in America, AT&T. Several years ago, Klein says he came to suspect that AT&T had installed secret computer gear designed to spy on internet traffic at the request of the National Security Agency, or NSA. Upset by what he saw, Klein decided to blow the whistle.
We are talking about a substantial portion of all the communications traffic in the United States.
According to Mark Klein, the secret room at AT&T contains gear which enables the government to look at every individual message on the internet and analyze exactly what people are doing.
And what we're talking about is the wholesale diversion of millions upon millions of communications from AT&T's backbone network.
The government has repeatedly denied that it's intercepting communications that are purely domestic. General Michael Hayden, the director of Central Intelligence, has said, "This program isn't a drift net. This is focused." The government does not publicly discuss details of its terrorist surveillance program or what's going on at AT&T. So we contacted the company. They declined to be interviewed, saying only AT&T is fully committed to protecting our customers' privacy. We do not comment on matters of national security. This press conference took place last spring. Afterwards, Klein dropped out of sight, but not before he had taken an extraordinary step. A few months earlier, he showed up unannounced at the offices of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Located in San Francisco, the foundation fights to protect people's privacy.
I was the technical director of that group that basically looked at the world, so we looked at all the technical problems of in the world and see how we could solve collection, analysis, and reporting on military and geopolitical issues all around the world, every country in the world. So we devised how to do that and protect U.S. citizens. So, and this was all before 9/11, and we devised how to do that, made that effective and operating. So we were actually prepared to deploy about 8 months before 9/11 and actually have a system that would run and manage the what I call 20 terabytes a minute of activity. So, but after 9/11, all the wraps came off for NSA, and they decided to, between the White House and NSA and CIA, they decided to eliminate the protection of U.S. citizens and collect on domestically. The one commercial company that I know of that participated provided over 300, well, probably on the average about 320 million records of communications of a U.S. citizen to a U.S. citizen inside this country.
What company?
AT&T. It was long-distance communications. So they were providing billing data. At that point, I knew I could not stay because it was a direct violation of the constitutional rights of everybody in the country. Plus, it violated the Pen Register Law and Stored Communications Act, the Electronic Privacy Act, the Intelligence Acts of 1947 and 1978. I mean, it was just a whole series of, plus all the laws covering federal communications governing telecoms. I mean, all those laws are being violated, including the Constitution, and that was a decision made that wasn't going to be reversed, so I could not stay there. I had to leave. They had to use our people to set it up initially, because no one else knew the code and no one else knew how to get it operating. So when they did that, those people came to me and said, you know, they're doing this, you know, and they told me what they were doing. And so I immediately went to the Intelligence Committee, because the Intelligence Committees were formed to have oversight over the intelligence community to make sure they didn't monitor U.S. citizens. This was a fallout of the Church Committee back in the 70s. The member of the staff that I went to Porter Goss, who was chairman of that committee at the time, and he referred her to General Hayden for any further, when it was the job of that committee to do the oversight on all this domestic spying, and they weren't doing it. I live in Maryland, actually 4 miles from NSA.
And what happened?
They came busting in.
Who's they?
The FBI, about 12 of them, I think, 10 to 12. They came in with the guns drawn on my house.
Where were you?
I was in the shower. I was taking a shower, so my son answered the door, and they, of course, pushed him out of the way at gunpoint, and came running upstairs and found me in the shower and came in and pointed a gun at me while I was, you know.
Pointed a gun at your head?
Oh, yeah. Those who were raided that day, all of us signed the DOD IG complaint. We were the ones who filed that complaint.
The Pentagon.
The Pentagon DOD
Inspector
IG
General complaint.
Against NSA, yes. Talking about fraud, basically corruption, fraud, waste, and abuse.
Who were the other people that were raided that same day?
Diane Rourke, Kirk Wiebe, and Ed Loomis.
Diane Rourke worked for the Senate committee.
Diane was the senior staffer. She had the NSA account. Diane would probe and be prying into what they were saying to find out really clearly what was going on. What they were really doing was retribution and intimidation, so we didn't go to the Judiciary Committee in the Senate and tell them, well, here's what Gonzales didn't tell you, okay? That was what it was really all about. And also it was retribution for that DOD IG complaint, because it was a rather embarrassing report that they gave. So, well, after some of the laws they passed, like the Patriot Act and their secret interpretation of Section 215, which is my view, of course, is the same as Tom Drake's, is that that gives him license to take all the commercially held data about us, which is exceedingly dangerous, because if you take that and put it into forms of graphing, which is building relationships or social networks for everybody, and then you watch it over time, you can build up knowledge about everyone in the country. And having that knowledge then allows them the ability to concoct all kinds of charges if they want to target you. Like in my case, they fabricated several charges and attempted to indict us on them. Fortunately, we were able to produce evidence that would make them look very silly in court, so they didn't do it.
Do you believe all emails the government has copies of in the United States?
I believe they have most of them, yes.
And you're speaking from a position where you would know, considering your position in the National Security Agency.
Right. All they would have to do is put various NARIS devices at various points along the network, at choke points or convergent points where the network converges, and they could basically take down and have copies of most everything on the network. I think the surveillance has increased. In fact, I would suggest that they've assembled on the order of 20 trillion transactions about U.S. citizens with other U.S. citizens.
How many?
20 trillion.
The Administration Director, General Keith Alexander, last month, asking him whether the NSA spies on U.S. citizens.
Does the NSA routinely intercept American citizens' emails?
No.
Does the NSA intercept Americans' cell phone conversations?
No.
Google searches?
No.
Text messages?
No.
Amazon.com orders?
No.
Bank records?
No.
Explain what he's saying, what he's not saying as well.
Well, I think it's part of it is a term, how you use the term intercept, as to whether or not what they're saying is we aren't actually looking at it, but we have it, you know, or whether or not they're actually collecting it and storing it somewhere.
So the mistake of the congressman was not to ask, are you collecting information?
Well, he also said things like, well, we don't collect, or we don't collect against U.S. citizens unless we have a warrant. And then at the same time, he said that we don't, at the same interview, he said we don't have the capability to collect inside this country. Well, those are kind of contradictory.
This compilation is an effort by a single American citizen. What can you do to help? Talk to your friend, your neighbor, your family. Spread the light.